Hi, this is Dina Scott, and we're ready to dive into Tier 2, Managing Challenging Students. When we refer to Tier 2, we're speaking of that 5 to 15% of the student body that are frequent flyers to the office. These are the kiddos that are at risk for truancy, failure to graduate. These are kids that are not responding to the whole school rules. For the students that we identify in this 10 to 15%, we want to have in place rapid response systems. We want to have small group interventions, and we want to have some individualization, such as behavior contracting, check in, check out, in place so that we know how we will respond when they fail to meet our expectations and our behavior goals. Now, Marzano says that Stage and Quiroz had 99 studies with 200 experimental comparisons with more than 5,000 students. And basically, the overall finding was it didn't matter which type of disciplinary intervention was used. 80% of the subjects that they analyzed had a decrease in disruptive behavior simply because an intervention was put in place. So it's that we need to act, we need to put an intervention in place, and we need to follow through. And 80% of the disruptive behaviors in Tier 2 will decrease. First type of effective Tier 2 intervention, of course, is positive reinforcement. According to a meta-analysis, if you add a positive reinforcement to a disciplinary intervention, you'll get a 31% decrease in disruptions. The research supports the use of mild punishment, and the research says there's a 28% decrease when punishment is used. However, if you couple a reward with punishment, you'll see a 33% decline in the inappropriate behaviors. Punishment is defined by Fay, Marzano, and Jensen as the opposite of reinforcement. Just like reinforcement, there are two types. There is positive punishment. That doesn't mean, yes, it's a positive or good punishment. It means that you're adding the stimulus, and when you do, the likelihood is that behavior will decrease. And negative punishment is the opposite. You're removing a stimulus, taking something away, and the behavior decreases. Let's take a look at some examples. So positive punishment occurs when the stimulus is added. So for example, perhaps you have added some extra class time. They have detention right after class. They have to stay 5 minutes. You add a think time form. You have a parent come in for a couple hours. So you add the presence of the parent as the stimulus. You give the student an extra minute to remain after the other students are dismissed. You require them to provide some sort of cleanup or community service, or perhaps they are writing paragraphs or a sentence. Now, negative punishment occurs when stimulus is removed. So if you remove something and the behavior decreases, that's negative punishment. We do a lot of that in school. We take away a recess. We have them sit silently at lunch near the teacher. We might exclude them from a fun activity. We might remove the student from the room. In-school suspension is a type of negative punishment. Isolation during lunch is a negative punishment. If we're removing a prize that other students are able to earn, that is considered a punishment. That is a negative punishment. Now Marzano wants to clarify and so I listed that there are times punishments warranted and must be applied, especially for repeat offenders, defiance, or disregard for safety. You want to use some form of punishment. However, he really cautions us that once a student has earned a reward, don't take that reward away as punishment. Find something else. The reason is because at the point you've removed the reward, it's no longer reinforcing. We had a little guy at school that was earning tickets, and he could take these tickets to the school store. And so he worked all week to earn tickets, and then he could go to the school store on Friday. Well, he was having a bad day on Friday, so a special education teacher took store away. The challenge was it took almost a month for us to find another reward the student was willing to work for. So we, in removing that one reward, we ended up taking away the only incentive that he had at the time to work. And so that student produced next to no work product for 3.5 weeks. So that's why he clarifies that, is that it takes away the one thing that is working. So pick something else for removal. And home contingencies are a great way to reduce problem behavior. We use those in check-in and check-out. Some teachers do a daily email home. Some teachers do a daily note home. Sometimes we have this on buses for bus behavior. But the most effective home contingencies are where we partner with the parents to improve the student performance. And this is just a side note. In my experience, if I've alienated the parent, the teacher-student relationship really suffers. Once the parent doesn't support what we're doing at school, the student kind of has a license to do whatever, and at least that's been my experience. So that home contact is a powerful form of positive and negative consequence. I would say face-to-face is always better, but a phone call can be effective. Marzano says that as well. So in working with parents, Southwest Alabama Regional In-Service Center and Troy University is kind of the forerunners on. They've done some research that are specifically involving parents and partnerships for student behavior. So they say take the first step, have a request in mind, contact the parent after a little time has passed so that the voice on the phone isn't angry, so that you're not passing judgment on the student. You're just telling them the facts of what happened. Allow parents to present their point of view. So we allow parents to talk and be heard, take notes, ask questions. Ask for the parents' thoughts. I have frequently gotten some great tips from parents on how to manage their children by asking them what they do at home, and also by hearing their take and perspective on what's happening. Sometimes there are other things going on in a child's life. Return parent calls promptly. This is what I learned as an administrator. The parent call you don't return promptly becomes the office visit you didn't have time for. So a good idea to stay on top of those calls. Send a delivery confirmation letter in the mail. So after a meeting, I would send out a letter that said, hey, thanks for coming in, or thanks for our conversation. I appreciate you partnering with me to help your child. This was our concern. This is our plan. And then just send it in the mail. It's a nice paper trail. It helps if somebody else is coming new to the situation. They can kind of see the history. And it gives you a way to document. And of course, documentation these days are just essential. When you meet with the parents, if you first state the facts. So I don't know if you've ever been on the other end of these conversations, but especially as an administrator, I find them challenging, where the conversation starts out with the teacher saying, your student chose. And for whatever reason, that seems to alienate the parents or cause them to be defensive or making value decisions. Your child thinks they want to, and if whatever follows that, the parent rarely believes that we know what their child is thinking, and so it puts them on the defensive. So if we just state the fact, I'm calling you because your child has not returned math homework on 10 different days this quarter, and I'm concerned. The next ingredient is letting the parent know what the typical student is doing. Your student did not return their math homework on 10 different days. The majority of my class returns their homework most of the time. Your child pushed another student in line. First graders can stand with their hands and feet to their side, so that you're giving them an example of what their child did factually, what the behavioral expectation is of a typically performing student. And then the next part is that you present the request. So I'm going to need your child to have a lunch detention. I'm going to need your child to clean the cafeteria tables today. I'm going to need your child to sign this note, have you sign this note and return it, sorry. And so that they know, what are you asking me to do when they're all done? Thompson notes, and I know all of us have found this to be the case, if you make a point of helping the parents feel successful about their children, you're going to find them far more willing to work successfully with you. Really our goal is to make them a partner, have them be a partner in their child's success, and to feel successful about their child. Another strategy you can use for Tier 2 students is no immediate consequence. That sounds counterintuitive, doesn't it? But there is a reduction in inappropriate behavior by 24% if, instead of providing a consequence, we're reminding the student of the behavior. This is what I have seen I've seen teachers that are very effective in doing this. They maybe use proximity. They'll go near a student, say not a choice. I've even seen them call across the room, hey Tom, not a choice, and keep the lesson moving. But what I have noticed is this is only effective in classrooms that have high rates of student engagement. If you have a lull and you're going to use this type of a reminder, if you have a classroom where children are working on worksheets, this usually everybody stops and looks. So it tends to not be as effective, I don't think, if the class isn't actively engaged while they're doing this process. Think time. Jensen talks about think time and has some marvelous forms for us to use that are on the CD in the book you purchased. And a think time basically is you have a dedicated room where students are sent when teachers cannot successfully address the disruptive behavior in the regular classroom. In our school, upper grades send their students to a partner in the lower grades. Lower grades send their students to a partner in the upper grades. And the students are given a think time form. They're expected to analyze their behavior, think seriously about what they did, and when they're ready, when that form is complete and they're ready to follow the rules, the receiving teacher will read through, check them off, and sign the time they return to class. Another strategy, and this was used a lot in the 80s, is assertive discipline. And this is considered an interventionist ideology, and we find a lot of teachers that have been teaching 30 years that still practice this, and they're expert at it. It makes a sharp distinction between rules and directions. So there's a lot of patience when the directions are given, but in rules, the students know the rules, They know the consequence for violating the rules. This is what Fay kind of alludes to when he talks about the school with over 200 rules. That often happens if you use assertive discipline school-wide, because the student has to know, if I break the rule, what's the consequence? Because off-task behavior is dealt with quickly and appropriately to get the student back on task, but disruptive behavior is they're up, they're out, and they're receiving their consequences quickly. It emphasizes positive consequences for appropriate behavior. So, hey, I love the way Sam's sitting there with his hands in his lap. That's perfect. Ooh, I love the way Marissa made eye contact, and I can tell she's listening. There are 5 steps to assertive discipline. The first is you establish the climate. You replace negative expectations with positive ones, and all that means is that instead of saying we don't touch our neighbors, or we don't touch, poke, or kick our neighbors, you would say we keep our hands and feet to ourselves. Instead of we do not disrupt learning, we work quietly while others are learning. So we just put it in the positive. Then the teachers learn the difference between assertive and non-assertive behavior, and then hostile, because sometimes assertiveness is confused with hostility. So instead of assertive, we just sound angry, and that's of course not effective for anybody. And assertive just is, I'm sorry, this is the rule, this is the consequence. Assertive teacher responses, they convey disapproval in a firm, unemotional, businesslike manner, and the communication is telling them the expected behavior. Oh, we keep our hands and feet to self. I'm sorry you've chosen to go to think time, and the think time form is administered and there's no further discussion. If you think about love and logic, turn your words into gold. You could use some of those in assertive discipline. If you had rules that you were going to enforce swiftly, you would then have to also mete out the consequence. The third step, establish limits and consequences. You signal the student that they're at their limit. You give them reminders. Sometimes you'll hear, what are you supposed to be doing, Johnny? And then the next time they're not, consequences given. You follow through on those consequences. There's no debate. There's no negotiation. You did this, the consequence is this. You brought a salamander to school, you are suspended. You hit the student with a fish, you're removed for 2 days. You implement a system of positive rewards or positive consequences for the positive behavior. So this oftentimes, perhaps you put a marble in a jar, and when the jar is full of marbles, then the students earn a reward. The group that has the most points gets a popcorn party, that sort of thing. So you have some type of system of rewards, and everybody's aware of the rules and aware that there are rewards for following them and there are swift consequences for failure to follow. Another form of intervention is called teacher reaction. This is most effective when the student's behavior is for teacher approval, and if they're trying to get your attention, sometimes just these steps will help that student redirect. Eye contact, we all do this, the teacher stare. There's a physical symptom or signal, and I'm a snapper, so I'll snap, and the students know, oops, that means she's wants me to get back on task. There's a verbal reminder, Tom, repeat the rules and expectations. Hey, we're sitting with our hands in our lap. Stimulus cue, where you prevent the behavior with a signal or proximity. We all do this. Go stand near the student that's causing the mixed behavior. We tap on the desk when they're looking around the room. Maybe we point to what they're supposed to be doing. Or another simple, just tell them to stop, knock it off. We say that all the time. More strategies. We can catch a student being good, and of course this is above and beyond our whole school strategy. So this might be like at our school we give Bobcat bucks if a student did a good deed. There could be some type of tangible recognition, a concrete symbol. I've noticed some teachers go and they'll put a token or a ticket on a student desk. They'll write their name on the board for doing something good. They call them out and give them kudos in front of the class. Another strategy is token economies. These are especially effective as we move to Tier 3, but where something's given and taken away, not bribed or coercion, but it's a method where students earn tokens that represent some type of tangible reward or intangible benefit. Direct cost is another strategy that you can use with your Tier 2 students, and that's oriented towards a negative consequence. It's explicit or direct. So for example, another word for this, by the way, is called response cost. This is what happens to us when we're speeding down the freeway and we're given a ticket. Perhaps the student is given an isolated timeout. They're sitting by themselves outside the classroom door. An overcorrection. How many times do we do this? Oops, no, we don't run in the hallway. You'll need to go all the way back and walk correctly. Oh, you tore up the paper and threw it all over the floor, so I'm going to need you to pick up that paper and vacuum the floor. Oh, you wrote on the school wall, so please come in for your lunch recess. You'll be scrubbing the entire wall. Group contingencies, according to Jensen and the group that authored Tough Kids. Group contingency is a very powerful intervention for students not following procedures. Many teachers do this. You have a group of students who earns a point when they transition quickly. Perhaps the group can earn a point for having their materials out and working first. They're the first group that cleans up their area. And it's a group contingency, so every single member of the group has to meet the criteria for the group to get a point or a token. And it's dependent on the individuals within the group to meet the standard. And it's very effective because it really is a use of positive peer pressure. If you have a Tier 3 student, this is antithetical, and you'll want to use caution if you use a group contingency, because frequently a student who is oppositionally defiant will defy the whole group and set up a power struggle within that group intentionally. So this is a great Tier 2 strategy. Do not probably want to apply that for Tier 3 students. Action step 2, another strategy and something we need to do for all behavior is you establish the limits for the unacceptable behavior. So if you have, for instance, we have a student who is new to our country. He's coming right out of a refugee camp, and when another student bumps up against him or touches him, he turns and shoves. What's the clear limits for that? If they shove and the student's not hurt, if they shove and the student's injured, that's inappropriate. And I don't say that lightly, but those are decisions that you kind of have to establish. What are the clear limits for the unacceptable behavior? And Tier 2 behavior, people should not be getting injured. That starts falling into more of your Tier 3 typically. And so your clear limits usually are the children are safe. Your Tier 2 behaviors typically are off task, or they're disrupting the educational process. They're not following the school rules or procedures, so the educational process is disrupted. Clear limits are a must. You have to decide what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, and then set criteria. What will happen if they are successful? What will happen if they are not successful? And then discuss why. And then you keep records. Marzano says if necessary, and I tell you keep records. If these student behaviors escalate, it leaves you with the data to compare. Is the behavior increasing? Is it decreasing? Is what we're doing working? Well, I'd like to thank you for our launch into Tier 2 behaviors, and tomorrow we'll pick up part 2 of this process of intervening in Tier 2, and then this weekend you have an assignment due, and we have discussion posts both today and tomorrow.